Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. Let's go on an adventure. That's right, today we'll be talking all about the returning adventure mechanic, and it's pretty big. There's a lot to go over, so I'll just jump right in. So if you see a card that looks like this, that is an adventurer card. They kind of work like split cards in that you can cast either half of it, and this is true anytime that you could cast the spell for any reason, with one notable exception, and we'll get to that in a bit. If you cast the right hand half, the creature, nothing special happens. It just resolves and goes to the battlefield just like any other creature spell would. If you cast the left hand half, though, there's a little extra. Casting this half is called casting the card as an adventure, and if the spell resolves, it doesn't go to your graveyard like you would expect. Rather, it gets exiled, and as long as it stays exiled, its owner can cast it again. This is where the exception I was talking about comes in. If you're casting it this way, you can't cast it as an adventure again, only the creature side. Unlike split cards, the two sets of characteristics are not given an equal footing. Rather, adventurer cards follow rules similar to double-faced cards, where the game only uses one set of characteristics at a time. This means the main, creature half, is assigned the default. If the adventure card is in any zone other than the stack, or if it's on the stack cast as the creature half, then those are the only characteristics that the adventurer card has. In contrast, the only time the game sees the characteristics of the adventurer half is when it's on the stack being cast as an adventure. This explains why Cascade decks can run cards like Brazen Borrower. When it's in the library or in exile, the mana value of this card is considered to be 3, meaning that the common Cascade spells will not stop on it. As another example, quashing a Birthright Boon would not let you exile anything from the player's graveyard, hand, or library because in those zones, the name of the card is Kellen the Fey-Blooded, which does not match the name of the spell that you countered. Actually, you wouldn't even be able to exile the one that you countered, since Quash does that by countering the spell normally, then letting you search for cards in the player's graveyard. As noted before, the name will have changed by then, so you would not be able to find it. Another consequence of this is that if you wanted to search your library for an adventurer card, you would need a tutor that was compatible with the characteristics it has in the library. So Time of Need would work, but Spellseeker wouldn't. And if you were playing a Conflux, you could get Kellen as the red card, but not the white one. Conversely, if an opponent is casting Birthright Boon, you could counter it with a Spell Snare, but not a Hydroblast. If you're playing an Adventurer card as the Adventure, it actually needs to resolve in order for you to be able to later play the creature. So if, for example, I played a Petty Theft against Nick's Grizzly Bears, but he sacrificed it in response, then my spell would have no legal targets when it tried to resolve, meaning that it would not resolve. It would just be put into my graveyard with no effect. Of course, if Nick played a counterspell on the Petty Theft, that would also do the trick. This would even apply if the Adventurer spell gets exiled, like with a Dissipate or even a Time Stop. Even though the Adventurer card ends up in the exile zone, it didn't get there from resolving as an Adventurer spell. So this means that in none of those cases would I be able to later cast this as a Brazen Borrower. I think probably the most interesting questions about the Adventurer cards have to do with when you're playing them. So like I said before, if you can play the card at all, the default is that you can play it in any way that you would legally be allowed to. So, for example, if Amy exiled Nyx Kellen with a Ragavan, she would be able to cast it as a Birthright Boon or as the creature. If she cast it as an adventure, then the normal rules around that would still apply. So it would get exiled, and then she would later be able to cast it as a Kellen. We can see that the associated rule has the controller of the spell exile it and gives that player the opportunity to cast it later. This is why Amy is the one who gets to play the Kellen from exile, even though it's Nick's card. Effects that say you can or cannot cast spells of certain kind can make this a little bit more complicated. In general, only the characteristics of the spell you want to cast matter. So if there was a Void Winnow out, then you could cast Bubble Up but not Aquatic Alchemist, whereas if you controlled a Nikya, then the opposite would be true. Sometimes an effect will give you an extra permission to cast a spell, but only if the spell meets certain criteria. Such effects can work with adventurer spells, and again, they generally look at the characteristics that the spell has once it's on the stack. So let's take Gandalf as an example. If you had him out, then you could cast Birthright Boon at instant speed, but this would not apply to Kellen. Be careful to check the oracle wording of the card in question though, because this is one area where it's possible to get tripped up. For example, the older wording of Melek makes it look like it would not be able to let you cast Birthright Boon from the top of your library, since it's not an instant or sorcery card. The updated wording makes it more clear that this trick does work, and Melek only checks the characteristics of the resulting spell on the stack. Even if you cast one of these spells as an adventure from an unusual zone or in an unusual way, as long as it was cast as an adventure, it will get exiled and you'll be able to cast it as a creature from there later. Going along those lines, you might have heard that you can flashback an adventure half of an adventurer card with Liar, or retrace it back with the emblem from Remnant 6. This is indeed correct. The machinery that allows this is actually highly technical, and it deserves a full video dedicated to breaking down exactly how this works. I promise I'm working on it, and I should be done in the next few days, but I wanted to at least mention this interaction here because I knew that people would be curious. The last thing that I wanted to touch on is how these cards work in Commander. There's a couple of new rulings that are important to know because the cards from the new set, you can now have an adventurer card as your commander, which was not possible before. So first, the color identity of an adventurer card includes the characteristics of both halves, meaning that Kellen could be the commander of a deck with red cards and white cards in it. Likewise, if your commander was mono red or mono white, you would not be able to put Kellen in your 99. The other interesting point is that if an adventurer card is your commander, you can cast it from the command zone either as a creature or as an adventure. The commander tax will count the number of times that you've cast it from the command zone in total, so either way will add 2 to the next time that you cast it. But if you cast Kellen as an adventurer, then it will end up getting exiled, and you'll be able to cast it as a creature from the exile zone, just like how you normally could. Because you are casting it from exile and not the command zone, the commander tax does not apply to this, nor does casting the creature from exile increase the amount of the commander tax. On the other hand, after it gets exiled, you could also opt to move it from the exile zone into the command zone, just like how you could if it got exiled in any other way. In this case, you would be able to cast either part of it, but you would be paying the commander tax when you do so. Whew, that was a lot of information. Give yourself a big pat on the back if you stuck through it all the way to the end. To close things out, here are a couple of challenge questions that I prepared to help you check your understanding. First, is it possible to use Snapcaster Mage to flashback Birthright Boon? The answer here is unfortunately no. Snapcaster Mage's ability targets an instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. While it's in your graveyard, the adventurer card is a creature, and so you cannot target it with Snapcaster. For a similar reason, Past in Flames will also not help you flashback an adventurer card. Here's another one. Amy plays Bloodbraid Elf. Can she cascade into Balluna and cast Seek Thrills? Okay, so for this one, Balluna's mana value is 3, meaning that Bloodbraid Elf will stop on this card. There actually was a time in Magic's history when this play would have worked, but the rules for Cascade have changed so that the resulting spell's mana value also needs to be less than the Cascade spells, meaning that it will not be legal to cast Seek Thrills, only Balluna. Seek Thrills has too high a mana value. If we cascaded into Kellen, it would be possible to cast either half, and if you cast it as an adventurer, you would get to exile it and cast Kellen later, although you would have to pay mana for that. But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.